Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. And if you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. Number 3. The Nessie Photo. In paranormal circles, it's called the Surgeon's Photo, a purported snapshot of the Loch Ness Monster. Taken in 1934, the photo was front-page news around the world. It was considered by many as proof the monster existed in the murky depths of that famous Scottish lake. To some, it looked like a long-necked dinosaur, perhaps a plesiosaur. After all, they thought, alligators and crocodiles were relics from the age of dinosaurs. Why not a swimming dinosaur too? For decades, this one photo has captured the imagination of millions. Until 1993, when the people responsible for the photo admitted it was a hoax. But the hoax wasn't created to pull a fast one on an unsuspecting public. It was created as revenge. Back in the 30s, a man named Marmaduke Wetherall was a well-known big game hunter and showman. Kind of a part Teddy Roosevelt and part P.D. Barnum. At the time, rumors of the Loch Ness Monster were well known in the British Isles. So much so that the London Daily Mail newspaper hired Wetherall to go out and find the beast. For its exclusive discovery, the paper would pay the Duke handsomely and make him famous. Wetherall went after Nessie with guns a-blazing. He scoured the shores of Ness Lake, took boats back and forth across the surface, and even went hunting into the surrounding forests. Soon, his perseverance was rewarded. He came across so-called four-toed footprints for the monster and broadcasted them back to the London Museum of Natural History for study. Then he waited for his cash reward for the Daily Mail. But the museum determined that the plaster prints were not from some 20-foot beast roaming the mighty shores of Loch Ness. Turns out, a local resident in Scotland had taken a mummified hippo foot, probably the bottom of an umbrella stand, and set about stamping in the mud around the lake, hoping to fool the Duke. He'd been fooled all right. The London Daily Mail withdrew its reward and publicly humiliated Wetherall. So he privately and quietly set out to get revenge on the paper. 4 months after the Duke's humiliation, Dr. Robert Kenneth Wilson was driving along the shores of Loch Ness when he spotted something in the water. Having his camera with him at the time, Dr. Ken pulled over and snapped 3 photos of the water-bound object. He was astonished to see it was moving across the surface. But Kenneth Wilson was not a gullible man. So even though he was skeptical, he sold the resulting photos to the Daily Mail for publication in April 1934. Not wanting to emulate the Duke, Wilson insisted his name be kept off the photo credit. As such, the most famous photo in the world became the Surgeon's Photo. But immediately, the skeptics voiced their disbelief. When Wilson's identity was eventually revealed, the press did some digging. What was he doing when he saw the object in the water, they asked. His response that he was going to visit a friend named Maurice Chambers to target shoot. What of his background? He was an army doctor, a war vet with the rank of colonel, and a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. He had been an expert witness in court cases, an author, and philanthropist. Photo analysts turned to Wilson's negatives and determined that they had not been modified or doctored. So given the doctor's impeccable credentials and the fact the photos themselves weren't faked, it was determined that the object that Wilson saw and took photos of had actually been in the water in Loch Ness. The question became, what the heck was it? A long-necked bird? An otter? A wayward piece of driftwood? Some kind of displaced reptile? A mermaid? And that's where the mystery of, and the fascination with, the Loch Ness Monster began. The picture hit the papers around the world. With photographic proof that there could be a creature in the lake, Marmaduke Weatherall was vindicated. Mission accomplished. But how exactly had been accomplished? Enter Weatherall's son, Ian Weatherall, and Ian's stepbrother, Christian Sperling. The Duke enlisted both young men to help build a contraption to drop in the lake. Sperling bought a clockwork toy submarine and modeled a serpent-like head and neck atop the sub's periscope out of moldable wood filler. Then they submerged the 14-inch sub, loaded a camera with film, took photos of the object, and then turned the camera over to Maurice Chambers, who in turn handed it over to his friend and target shooting pal, Robert Kenneth Wilson. Dr. Ken had the photos developed and sold them to the Daily Mail for £100. Turned out they put his impeccable reputation up for sale at the price of about $6,800 in today's money. But none of this came out to the public until 1993, when Nessie researchers tracked down Christian Sperling, who confessed to the hoax on his deathbed. "All I got was a message saying, 'Can you make me a monster?' Sperling said at the time. 'I just sat down and made it, on the idea of a sea serpent.'" Amazingly, there are some today who believe the confession of the hoax was a hoax itself, and that the surgeon's photo is real and proof that the Loch Ness Monster still swims somewhere in the Scottish Deep. Number 2. The Ummo Affair. Have you ever wanted to believe in something so strongly that you simply decided it was true, whether it was or not? That's the premise behind a fascinating UFO sighting in Spain in the 1960s. On the evening of Sunday, February 6, 1966, a group of soldiers were training in Alash when they witnessed not only an unidentified flying object, but an unidentified landing object. And these soldiers weren't alone in their sighting. Among the corroborating witnesses of the UFO landing was Jordan Pina, who spotted what he called a white disc while driving to nearby Madrid. Pina said that the object changed color from white to yellow to orange as it landed near a military airfield. He got out of his car to watch it land and then drove towards it in an open field. The disc, Pina told UFO researchers later, was about 30 feet in diameter and hummed with a steady vibration as he approached it. Before we get a closer look, however, the disc raised up and shot off into the heavens. Yet, while blasted out of sight, Pina says he got a glimpse of a strange symbol emblazoned on the belly of the spaceship. A little over a year later, not too far away, a handful of witnesses saw a similar flying aircraft. This one was larger, 120 feet in diameter, but had the same symbol on its underside. Like the sighting in Alish, the saucer changed colors, only this time it turned red before it retreated into the sky. A few miles away, 7 more people saw the UFO as it landed in a field behind a local restaurant in the Madrid suburb of Santa Monica. In both landing events, the witnesses reported seeing burn marks or indentations in the soil where the spacecraft purportedly landed. Remarkably, 2 of the witnesses said they took photos of the aircraft, 7 clear photos in all. After the sighting near the restaurant, a researcher asked witness Fernando Sesma why there was a group of people ready nearby with cameras. Sesma confidently told them it was because they knew the craft would land there, because the aliens had told them it would. Sesma had received messages from the aliens, written in a strange cryptic cuneiform that, when translated, revealed the ETs were from a planet called Ummo, 14.6 light-years from Earth. He showed researchers the letters. Then he showed some of the metal and plastic pieces of the equipment he claimed came from the landing sites of the UFO. Sesma, it seems, had become a true believer. When word got around, a French UFO researcher named Henri Degusset papered the suburbs of Madrid with flyers saying he paid $300 to anyone who gave him one of these pieces of equipment. It can't be understated how much the scientific community in Madrid at the time took this UFO sighting seriously. They looked into the Ummo Affair, but it was all for naught. The plastic and metal pieces obtained from the landing site proved to be Earth-made, if uncommon, used primarily by NASA and weather equipment. The photographs were also soon proven to be faked, with optical experts concluding the UFO was nothing more than a model on a string dangling in front of the camera lens. Many of the witnesses were soon also proved to be non-existent, a kind of friend of a friend scenario. Even UFO researcher Henri Dugosset proved to be elusive to find, with scientists concluding he probably didn't even really exist. Oh, and those coded messages Fernando Sesma received from the Umites? He got them through the mail, written on paper, sent by a Spanish psychologist as part of a weird study about human belief. That psychologist was the initial witness of the craft landing, Jordan Pina. Otherwise known as Dr. Jose Luis Jordan Pina, a psychologist specializing in human behavior. He wanted to see what people believe and why. So he created this UFO hoax/psychological experiment. And that should be the end of the story, but it isn't. Ever since those sightings in Madrid, UFOlogists, scientists, philosophers, reporters, and politicians all over the world have continued to receive letters from the supposed aliens. These hundreds of letters have been postmarked from all four corners of the earth. They are all signed with that mysterious symbol supposedly emblazoned on the spaceship. Even after the death of Ummo true believer Fernando Sesma, the letters continued. Each letter is supposed to contain technical and scientific specifications of technology that has not yet been invented. But according to renowned UFO researcher Jacques Vallée, the letters contain only schematics for technology that already exists, though it might not be widely used. In his book, Revelations, Alien Contact and Human Deception, Vallée speculates that the Ummo sighting in 1967 created some kind of cult that still exists today. Umites, he calls them, are the ones who continue to perpetuate the belief in the Ummo Affair. While this might seem harmless, maybe even on the level of a prank, consider that when the FBI raided the San Diego compound of the Heaven Gates cult in 1997, they found dozens of copies of the book Contact from Planet Ummo, written by Fernando Sesma. Given that members of Heaven's Gate committed mass suicide, perhaps the belief in the Ummo Affair isn't so harmless after all. Number 1. The Cottingly Fairies. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle may be famous for creating Sherlock Holmes. But in 1920, the esteemed writer not only fell for the Cottingly Fairy hoax, he unknowingly helped perpetuate it. 60 years later, at least one man would pay the price for Doyle's codswallop. In the summer of 1917, two cousins, 9-year-old Frances and 16-year-old Elsie, decided it might be fun to play a trick on Elsie's mother. Actually, it was a bit of a cruel trick, because the mother, Polly, was in a fragile state of mind. A year earlier, she had lost her son during the First World War, and she had grown angry and tyrannical towards her daughter around the house. To get back at their mom's dark demeanor, Elsie and Frances cut out pictures of girls from a children's book, drew wings on them, and then took photographs with them in the backfield using their dad's state-of-the-art camera. When Dad developed the photos in his darkroom, he was bemused. The girls had done a really good job of creating the trick photos. They almost look real, he said. Oh, but they are real, the girls coyly proclaimed. Then they proceeded to tell their dad about fairies in their yard who would come out and play with them. Frances and Elsie then took the photos to show their mother, who was astonished. Since the death of her son, Polly, like many people at the time, had despondently turned to spiritualism as a way to possibly contact their dead family members. Polly was all in on spiritualism and believed that the pictures were real. For their part, the girls said nothing to correct her assumption. and they had a good private laugh over the whole thing. But that wasn't the end of the story. 2 years later, unbeknownst to her family, Polly had signed up to attend a spiritualism seminar in London. When the class subject rolled around to the existence of fairies, Polly brought in the pictures of her daughter and niece as kind of a show and tell. Also attending the seminar was fellow spiritualist Arthur Conan Doyle, who was writing an article for the Strand magazine on the subject of fairies. Seeing these photos, he too was astonished. He printed them alongside his article as definitive proof that fairies were real. Now, it shouldn't be said that the photos tricked the world into believing in fairies. Even in the 1920s, people were savvy enough to realize the fairies in the photos looked pretty fake. But there were still some hardcore believers in what was called theosophy, a pseudo-religion invented by a Russian mystic in the 19th century. It was those true believers who kept the story going long after public interest waned. Also not helping matters was Francis and Elsie, who kept up the charade for the next 40 years. They never wavered in their story that the photos were real, never gave a hint that they created the fairies as an elaborate hoax. The Cottingly Fairies became a charming little nudge-a-wink story about two precocious girls and their devious little prank. Even when the girls drifted apart and lost contact with each other, their story stayed true. When one newspaper reporter tracked down Elsie in 1968, she maintained she did not create the fairies, and even went as far to say that the camera had captured their innermost thoughts, and had broadcasted those thoughts onto the image. Yeesh. Unfortunately, this helped some people remain convinced that the photos were real. Like Professor Joseph Cooper of Bradford, West Yorkshire. Cooper had spent his life studying all things esoteric and had lectured all around the world on subjects like astrology, psychic phenomenon, and yes, even fairies. One day in 1975, while standing in line at a bookstore, Cooper struck up a conversation with the lady behind him. She was from Cottingly, and she knew the little girls who had taken the photos. Professor Cooper dutifully tracked down the now elderly women and spent years interviewing them about the photos and their belief in fairies. He amassed books full of notes from the discussions. Not once did the women ever hint that the photos were anything but genuine. And the more they spoke, the more he believed. Cooper wrote articles and books about the women and fairies. He even appeared on local television and radio to demand the public take fairies seriously. But in 1981, Cooper didn't come home one day, or the next. As the days turned into weeks, the professor's wife, Shirley, grew despondent. Finally, she called Elsie Wright and asked if she had any contact with her husband. "I haven't seen him since I told him the photos were fake," Elsie said flatly. 9 months later, Joe Cooper finally came home. He admitted he had a nervous breakdown upon hearing Elsie's confession. His whole belief system had collapsed. He was embarrassed and ashamed, dispirited. Shirley says that Joe wasn't the same after that. They ended their 40-year marriage soon after he came home. Victims of a hoax from 60 years in the past. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.